Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Have you ever wondered how you literally rewrite the destiny of an entire region practically overnight? Well, today we're breaking down the anatomy of one of the most monumental geopolitical operations in modern South Asian history, and that is the abrogation of Article 370. We're going to rely strictly on our source material to trace the step-by-step execution of an operation that was literally decades in the making. We'll unpack the strategy, the immense secrecy, and the complex legal maneuvers behind this event. And we're doing this entirely neutrally, really just to understand exactly how this massive shift was orchestrated from the ground up.
Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to picture the scene. It's the night of August 4th, 2019. According to our source, this completely eerie silence has descended over the Srinagar Valley. Slowly, the phone lines are going dead. Internet speeds are throttling down to absolute zero. And out on the streets, paramilitary trucks are just rolling by, one after another, in the dark.
And that brings us to a pretty chilling, suspenseful question, right? What exactly was about to happen that night? Local politicians suspected it was just a routine anti-terror operation. But under the cover of this totally unprecedented communications blackout, a much, much larger, historic event was actually unfolding.
So, let's look at Section 1, the night of August 4th, the lockdown.
You see, that evening wasn't just some sudden random crackdown. It was actually the climax of a massive, meticulously planned, multi-year covert strategy. Immediate, sweeping actions were taken by security forces that night. Major political figures like National Conference leader Farooq Abdullah and PDP leader Mehbooba Mufti were abruptly detained or put under house arrest. A total communication and internet blackout was enforced right across the board, and CRPF personnel were deployed at literally every single major intersection. The objective here was absolutely clear. They needed to prevent any organized resistance or the spread of rumors before the sun even came up.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. This is Kashmir and Article 370, the historical context.
Because to truly understand why this extreme lockdown happened in the first place, the source takes us back in time to look at the root cause of the conflict. Back in 1989, the Kashmir Valley was suddenly consumed by militancy. The source details how an ISI-backed insurgency led to the tragic exodus of Kashmiri Pandits and really decades of widespread violence. Fast forward to 2014, a new national government is formed in India, and crucially, a man named Ajit Doval is appointed as the National Security Advisor. 5 years after his appointment, we arrive at the pivotal 2019 abrogation.
So, what exactly was Article 370? Well, according to the source material, it wasn't just a simple law. It was more like a constitutional shield, granting Jammu and Kashmir its own separate constitution and flag. The source emphasizes that for decades, this specific autonomy inadvertently provided a cover that basically allowed separatist networks, foreign-backed propaganda, and militant infrastructure to take root and really flourish without any outside interference.
Which brings us to Section 3, the secret strategy and covert planning phase from 2015 to 2018.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the removal of such a deeply entrenched shield was planned. During the period between 2015 and 2018, NSA Ajit Doval completely bypassed standard protocols. He traveled across Kashmir incognito to gather unfiltered intelligence directly from the ground up. This resulted in a very specific three-pronged strategy to systematically dismantle that separatist infrastructure. Step 1 focused on economic development, pushing infrastructure projects and creating jobs, really trying to pull the youth into the mainstream. Step 2 was a massive strengthening of intelligence, heavily expanding the IB and RAW networks on the ground. And Step 3, which was perhaps the most critical, was cutting off the money. Agencies like the NIA and ED were weaponized to ruthlessly dismantle the Hawala networks that were funding the unrest.
By late 2018, all of this groundwork was complete. And that brings us to this very important number 3. A top-secret meeting took place in Delhi to finalize the plan, and only 3 people were in the room: Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Home Minister Amit Shah, and NSA Ajit Doval. They knew for a fact that if word leaked even slightly, the international uproar and local unrest would immediately derail the whole shebang. So the circle of trust was kept absolutely 100% airtight.
Now onto Section 4, navigating the legal and security maze to prepare for the fallout.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that deciding to execute the plan was one thing, but actually pulling it off, that required navigating an incredibly complex legal and security maze. You see, critics thought removing Article 370 was legally impossible because it technically required the approval of the Jammu and Kashmir State Assembly. But Amit Shah's legal team found a pretty clever constitutional workaround. Because the state had been under president's rule since 2018, there was no active assembly. Under a specific constitutional provision, this meant the national parliament could legally step in and act as the assembly to approve the change.
Okay, so with the legal path cleared, the security apparatus moved in rapidly, and I mean rapidly. In July 2019, over 50,000 extra troops were deployed. The official cover story they used? Enhanced security for the Amarnath Yatra pilgrimage. By early August, tourists and pilgrims were suddenly advised to just leave the valley, citing purported terror threats. Then, in the midnight hours of August 3rd, the final blackout orders and arrest warrants were typed up. And that led directly to the sudden, silent lockdown on August 4th that we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer.
This brings us to Section 5, the decision of August 5th and the climax in Parliament. So, everything, this meticulously choreographed military and political buildup, it all culminated on the morning of August 5th, 2019. Home Minister Amit Shah stood up in the upper house of Parliament and declared, "Honorable Chairman, I propose to abrogate all clauses of Article 370 through a presidential order." The source describes this moment of absolute pin-drop shock in the room, which was followed immediately by uproar. But behind the scenes, months of quiet strategic coalition building across party lines had already secured the necessary majority. And just like that, the historic resolution passed.
So the absolutely crucial point here is what happened next. Or actually, scratch that, it's more about what didn't happen. The expected international and domestic explosion, it largely failed to materialize. Pakistan panicked, they appealed to the UN, their media predicted outright war, but no war came. China lodged formal objections, the USA accepted it as India's internal democratic process, and most importantly, while the Kashmir Valley remained highly restricted and tense, the massive violence that so many feared simply did not occur. The source credits this entirely to those years of quiet groundwork that dismantled the networks capable of organizing that kind of violence. Let's move to our final section, Section 6, Kashmir after the decision and the new reality on the ground.
So how does the source evaluate the on-the-ground reality in the region in the years following 2019? Well, let's look at the before and after. Before the abrogation, the region operated under a separate constitution. Outside investment was heavily restricted, and separatist funding was virtually unchecked. But after 2019, national laws like the right to information and sweeping women's rights were applied. For the very first time, outside land purchases and investments were allowed, and tourism started hitting record numbers. The source also points to major democratic milestones, like the successful Panchayat elections and the recent 2024 assembly elections, as signs of a rapidly shifting civic landscape.
Ultimately, the source frames this entire historical event as the culmination of basically 30 years of waiting, 5 years of intense secret preparation, and a bloodless execution of a monumental geopolitical shift. It's presented here not merely as a victory of state or military force, but really as a triumph of patience, deep intelligence, and meticulous, unyielding strategy.
And you know, that leaves us with a pretty profound thought to end on. When a deeply entrenched, decades-old conflict is reshaped practically overnight by just a few individuals acting in strict secrecy, how does it alter our understanding of how modern history is truly made? It certainly pulls back the curtain and makes you wonder about the hidden mechanics of geopolitical power operating right now.
आपको हमारे वीडियोस पसंद आ रहे हैं, कार्टून वीडियोस और सॉन्ग आपको देखने में अच्छे लग रहे हैं तो चैनल को लाइक, शेयर और सब्सक्राइब करिएगा। और आपको भी घर बैठे वर्क फ्रॉम होम करके पैसे कमाने हैं तो हमारा कांटेक्ट करिएगा, यहाँ पे नंबर शो कर रहे हैं, वहाँ से आप हमसे व्हाट्सएप पे बात करके ऑनलाइन सीख के होम अर्निंग कर सकते हैं।